Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, overnight demonstrations erupt into violence in Jerusalem and in Jaffa. At least 8 are arrested. Meanwhile, disabled IDF veterans bring the streets of Tel Aviv to a standstill. And finally, while the mask mandate is over, you might want to keep wearing them. Stay tuned for the surprising reasons. Violence breaking out in Jerusalem and Jaffa overnight as protests between Jews and Arabs in the area descended into riots. Beginning in Jerusalem on the steps outside the Damascus gate to the Old City, police and Palestinians clashing for the 5th night in a row, every night since the start of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan last week. Muslim residents of East Jerusalem typically gathering on the stairs outside the gate every evening of the month, but given the pandemic and incidents in years past, barriers were put up to reduce the crowds. Similarly, residents from the Gaza Strip and more distant parts of the West Bank were restricted from access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and this leading to massive nightly demonstrations marked by throwing stones and fireworks at security forces, police responding with stun grenades and water cannons in addition to arresting 5. Meanwhile, in the city of Yafo, or Jaffa, just south of Tel Aviv, protests and counter-protests erupted into violent riots as well, and the incident sparked by an assault earlier in the day. 2 Muslim men in their 30s were arrested Sunday for their suspected involvement in attacking a local rabbi when the rabbi and a co-worker were in the area looking at potential locations for a new yeshiva. Eyewitnesses saying that the suspects were overheard yelling that it's forbidden for them to move here. Later in the evening then, large crowds of both Jews and Arabs gathering in the area, the Arabs protesting Jews moving in to live in the already mixed city, while the Jews protested on behalf of their right to live in peace. Police arriving to the scene to help keep the crowds separate. Several Arab protesters began to throw stones and fireworks at the officers, however, as well as to block roads with garbage cans set on fire. And at this time, police ordered the crowds to disperse, which the crowds mostly complied with. Many, still taking issue with the situation, though, as well as the alleged conduct of the police, continued to riot. At one point, rioters even trapped and allegedly attempted to kill a passerby who had arrived in the area to get ice cream. The driver filing a complaint with police explaining that he was driving on Yefet Street when he saw a small fire and decided to go around it. But at this point, a masked man on a bike allegedly prevented him from leaving, saying, quote, "You can't run away, you're dead here." And this followed by dozens more people arriving to stone and kick the vehicle. The driver then abandoning the car and luckily being helped to safety by police and others in the area who came to his aid. At least 3 have been arrested in connection to the violence. Joining me now with more on the overnight riots, English news editor for Arutz Sheva News, Yoni Kampinski. Yoni, thanks for being with us. Now, what happened? How did things escalate to the point that they did?
So, Aaron, we have to understand that there are a few issues here. One is actually the social media platforms. You know, we know that, for example, the incident in Jerusalem where an Arab slapped a Jewish boy, it was posted on TikTok by the perpetrators, and that's one phenomenon that we're seeing today. It's the footage of violent incidents being uploaded and posted. It's not by bystanders, you know, who are standing there and seeing what's going on, rather by the attackers and their friends. Now, this, of course, motivates others. And that's one of the things that we're seeing. Another thing, of course, is the month of Ramadan, as the Arab youth look for something to do in the evening after their the Ramadan prayers and all. So they start gathering, and a protest becomes, unfortunately, a violent mob. Regarding Jaffa, as well as in other places throughout the country, it's also about some Arabs being against any Jewish presence in areas which, we must remember, are located in central Israel and are historically part of the Jewish state. So that's what we're seeing here these days. It's about the yeshiva in Jaffa. It's about this issue of the presence of purchasing Jewish lands. And it's also coming regarding about it's because of the month of Ramadan. But what we're hearing from activists is that this is worse than anything we've seen before.
So, you know, many protesters called for continuing the riots and preventing Jews from living in Jaffa. Do you suspect that this is just the beginning of a larger ongoing demonstration?
I'll tell you what, there is a feeling that we are in the midst of something that will take a few days till it ends. But there is a bit of optimism because, you know, these youths, some of them are Israeli residents, some of them are residents of Jerusalem. We're not talking about Judea and Samaria with Intifada and things like that, and people have to go back to their schools and all. There is a hope that someone will take responsibility at some point, and the violence will slowly fade away.
So what's being done to prevent violence from breaking out in the future?
So far, and it's mainly police activity. But one of the claims that we're actually hearing from activists in Jerusalem is that the local courts release those who are arrested very fast. So even if the police arrest many people in the riots, they'll be out going home very fast. So the main demand now that we're hearing from local activists in Jerusalem, at least, is that the courts need to act strongly to deter potential attackers in the future. In addition, some are demanding that the police actively increase their response to attacks, including even firing towards stone throwers, because what these activists remind us is, as we know, a stone can kill. In addition, there is demand for more dialogue and action from Arab leaders, but I at least heard Arab MKs today, and they do not want to condemn the riots, and they're mainly trying to explain the Arab side, and we're not seeing that yet. And the hope is that we'll see also the Arab leaders condemning and trying to, bring the violence to an end.
Well, so it's often been noted that outside forces come to Jaffa and to instigate violence, making it seem like residents are behind it when they're not. Who was at the protest and the riots last night, outsiders or residents? Who instigated this?
No, so I'll tell you the truth, Aaron, it is probably a mix of the two. We know that many Arab residents of Judea and Samaria, they reside in the Arab neighbors of Jaffa and also, of course, in the areas of Jerusalem. However, our correspondent who was at the protest and the riots yesterday, he heard from locals that many of the rioters are from the area. So it might be, for some easier to feel that it's some people coming from outside. But these events and these incidents do influence what's going on in the neighborhoods in Jerusalem and the neighborhoods in Jaffa and other places around the world. So it really seems to me a mix of the both. And it's very important to understand that this is something that's happening in Israel with Israeli Arabs who are part of these mobs, these riots.
All right, Yoni Kampinski, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on, the debate over poor and underserving treatment for wounded IDF veterans is far from over. Hundreds, if not thousands, of wounded veterans of all ages coming out to support reforms on Sunday in a protest that brought major thoroughfares with Tel Aviv to a standstill. The protesters, galvanized by veteran Itzik Saidian, who just last week set himself on fire. And many in the crowds similarly expressing how they were driven to near suicide before finally being approved for any sort of treatment. So rallying behind the handicapped IDF Veterans Organization as well as Saidian's family, the demonstrations calling for real change to the system. First and foremost being a reduction in the bureaucracy that leaves all too many wounded veterans alone to suffer unsupported. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in the meantime, responding to protests by meeting with the organizers and repeating vows to push meaningful reforms as soon as possible.
קיבלתי את המכתב ששלחתם לשר הביטחון, בעקבות זה תיאמתי איתו שאנחנו נביא גם עזרה ראשונה וגם רפורמה כוללת לטיפול בפצועים, בנכים, בהלומי הקרב, בכולם, ונעשה זאת תוך שבועיים בממשלה.
אנחנו נמצאים בימים קשים מאוד, שחבר שלנו שוכב שרוף בבית חולים, ואנחנו מפה קודם כל שולחים לו החלמה מהירה, ומצפים להחזיר אותו למשפחת נכי צה"ל, ולעזור לו בשיקום המחודש שלו. אני רוצה מפה להודות לך, באמת הכאב הוא מאוד גדול, והעיוותים ההיסטוריים הם דרושים תיקון ובמיידי. אני רוצה להודות לשר הביטחון בני גנץ ולך, אדוני ראש הממשלה, על זה שאתם מתעלים מעל השיקולים, כל שיקול פוליטי, ושמים את פצועות ופצועי צה"ל במקום לא הם ראויים, ובו כל ממשלת ישראל למעשה נרתמת לעזור ולתקן את העוולה הגדולה הזאת. תודה רבה.
Returning now to politics, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu still working as fast as he can to form a functional coalition before the deadline to do so ends. Especially since if he fails, we will likely be thrust back into another election cycle, the fifth in just over 2 years. So what's the plan, considering that Netanyahu is still at least 2 seats short of a government? Well, a complete one-time overhaul of the electoral system may apparently be the answer. A new proposal raised by the religious Shas party and reportedly backed by other right-wing leaders suggests a special direct election for prime minister without changing the current Knesset. The only problem is that even though this would technically solidify a candidate as prime minister, the new prime minister would still need to cobble together a coalition, and the numbers would be as deadlocked as ever. Additionally, this system has been tried before. In fact, it was used several times between 1996 and 2001 before being scrapped for making it too hard to form a coalition. Additionally, in the first place, deciding to hold a direct vote would require both a majority in the Knesset, which Netanyahu does not have, as well as several legislative reforms which the caretaker government may not be authorized to pass. At any rate, a direct vote for prime minister is currently the talk of the town, right-wing leaders floating any idea that might prevent a fifth Knesset vote. And here to discuss it further, I'm joined by legal counsel for the Hallel Likud Forum and Im Tirtzu, Ziv Maor, and former Yesh Atid Knesset member and Secretary General of the Confederation of United Zionists, Rabbi Dov Lipman. Thank you both so much for being with us. Now, first of all, Ziv, I'll start with you. Passing this direct prime minister election, is it truly the best way forward to prevent fifth elections, or is it just an attempt by Netanyahu to supposedly subvert the will of the people?
Well, I do believe that this is a very interesting proposal that should be seriously considered. You were very much right to mention the fact that this is not the first time that it is being attempted, and last time in the 1990s and the early 2000s it failed. But if we're currently discussing this proposal not as a permanent reformation of the government structure, but as an ad hoc solution for the fact that for 4 election cycles, the Israeli people did not provide a clear answer to the question who is elected to become the prime minister, this could be a very interesting solution. Because if indeed after 2 cycles of personal elections for prime minister, the result would be that there will be a person that is identified as acceptable upon the majority of the people, then I believe that the resistance for this individual even among members of the Knesset who were elected to object to the continuance of Netanyahu's term would somewhat dissolve, because the people have spoken in a very specific way. So if we're talking about an ad hoc solution rather than a reformation of the entire structure, then this might prevent us from another election cycle that will most probably end up without a clear answer.
Rabbi Lipman, same question to you.
I don't see any way that this is a solution to the problem. I think we'll be left back in the same place after having gone through a contentious campaign for who's the prime minister. Remember, according to the rules, the law that they're proposing, you have to get 40%, and then you're the candidate for prime minister. You're not talking about someone who has a majority of the country. Everyone will go back to their exact same place on yes Netanyahu or no Netanyahu, and will be in the exact same place in terms of not being able to form a coalition. So I don't understand the value of the proposal and almost see it as a distraction from the inability of Netanyahu at the moment to form a government, or anyone to form a government. And I think we're just spinning ourselves in circles instead of getting to the heart of the matter, which is the fact that we are in this deadlock and no one can form a coalition with or without this idea of a special election.
Well, again, given all the obstacles that a reformation like this would even need to pass, is it possible to pass this time around? And is there a third option? Dov, I'll keep with you.
The next option would be, well, first of all, there is an option on the table, which is if the Religious Zionist Party would cave on their ideological stance and allow Ram to support the government from the outside. After that fails, if that continues to fail, there is a possibility of it going back to the Knesset. The president can give the mandate back to the Knesset, and there are all kinds of possibilities can happen. You know, the Haredim, once they see that it's not going to be Netanyahu right-wing government, who knows where they could find partnerships and how we could get to 61. So I don't think we're anywhere near the point of absolutely heading to a fifth election. We still have a long way to go and many different variables that could take place.
Ziv, I'll add, Yesh Atid chair Yair Lapid is calling again for a unity government based on Zionists and patriots. Who is he talking to, considering that he only got 45 recommendations and cannot, as of yet, get to 61 without including the Arab parties, many of which, including Ram, identify as anti-Zionist?
Well, he's talking to his electorate, that's all. They don't have a real solution. The Israeli public, as it became clear in the past elections, voted down the proposal, their agenda, their personal profile of the party that they are offering. So he's continuing to deliberating with his voters, which is fine, which is okay in a democracy. But whatever he's offering is completely impossible. The premise that the Likud would give up on Netanyahu, the premise that the Haredim would go with him, the premise that there is any form of coalition that would put together on one hand Bezalel Smotrich and the Religious Zionist Party, and on the other Meretz and the Labour Party. These are all not possible solutions, and I do not agree with what Rabbi Liebman have just said. If eventually the mandate goes back to the Knesset, there is no solution. There is no way to get out of this deadlock without either fifth elections or a reform in the various solutions that happen. There are no 61 votes for any realistic candidate currently in the current system. This is the reality. And either several, as you call it, exclusionist people go out, for instance, from Gideon Sa'ar's New Hope Party into Netanyahu's coalition. Either that happens, or we're going to fifth elections, or I'm quite in favor of the creative proposal of Aryeh Deri about an ad hoc, one-time personal elections for the prime minister. These are the three options that are on the table.
Well, I think all of the options proposed thus far are pretty hard pills to swallow. We'll see what happens. In any case, Ziv Maor, Rabbi Lippman, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
In other news, the coronavirus mask mandate in Israel is over, but Israelis are feeling a bit exposed as they apprehensively reveal their pretty faces. And as it turns out, there may be good reason. Chana Rifkin with the story.
For the first time in over a year, Israel's official mask mandate has been lifted, and citizens are apprehensive but excited to express their newfound freedom, even if it is limited to small groups in outdoor settings, especially as authorities warning that the pandemic could return at any moment. Prime Minister Netanyahu outlining the details of the heavily eased restrictions.
אנחנו מובילים כרגע את העולם ביציאה מהקורונה, והחידוש של הלימודים גם בחטיבת הביניים בצורה מלאה זה סימן מובהק לכך. יש שני דברים שאני רוצה להדגיש. אחד, עוד לא נפטרנו מהמסכות. זאת אומרת, בתוך המבנים, בתוך הכיתות, חובשים מסכות. בחוץ אפשר להוריד אותם, גם כן בהמלצה של חבישתן במהלך התקהלויות, אבל באופן כללי, בפנים מסכות. בחוץ אפשר להוריד. הדבר השני הוא שעדיין לא סיימנו עם הקורונה, משום שיכולה לחזור.
That said, there may be an additional unintended benefit to all the face coverings, aside from reducing the rate of infection. Officials at the Sheba Medical Center reporting a whopping 65% drop in hospitalizations of severe asthma patients and a 45% drop in the number of asthma-related urgent visits to the ER. And this as 80 to 90% of all asthma referrals are connected to allergies. So speaking with the Jerusalem Post, author of the study, Professor Nancy Agmon-Levin, saying it's a nice idea that you can decrease exacerbation from pollen with something that costs 90 agurot, or about 25 cents, as opposed to the drugs that are typically prescribed, drugs that are very expensive and often come with adverse effects. Therefore, if you're one of the 30% of Israelis who suffer from allergies, maybe keep that mask on for just a little while longer.
In other news, International Earth Day is just a couple days away on April 22nd. And this year, with literally tons of PPE like masks and gloves still littering the streets, in addition to plastic bottles, bags, single-use cutlery, and a recent coastal oil spill, there's a lot of work to be done. So for Israel's part, environmental organizations are launching the 1 Million Clean campaign, inviting citizens from all over the country to join in a mass nationwide cleanup.
Hundreds of millions of people around the world are feeling very connected emotionally to this land, to the Holy Land. But Israel, in the last years, was very, very dirty. We decided to lead a campaign to clean up the country and to change the awareness of the citizens of Israel and the visitors towards the dirt and the cleaning.
As part of the campaign, hundreds of previously unemployed Israelis have now been hired to clean up the parks and nature reserves, a job that they describe as a pleasure to be a part of. And on Earth Day, later this week, tens of thousands of volunteers are already registered to join them. The hope being that 1 million volunteers will soon be included. So if you're interested in getting in on the action, sign up with the Nature and Parks Authority. And in general, remember the golden rule for the future: always leave the places that you visit better than when you found them. It's the essence of tikkun olam, or the practice of healing the world. Now, many of you may or may not be familiar with the concept of chutzpah, a word very difficult, if not impossible, to accurately translate. But this next story is about a chutzpah that you will definitely never forget. Wrestler turned comedian Lior Brooks.
Oi, gewollt, here comes the chutzpah.
Meet Lior Brooks, Israel's first and only international pro wrestler superstar turned stand-up comedian. Hailing from Netanya, Israel, Lior Brooks, aka the Chutzpah Lior Ben David, is making a name for himself outside the ring these days, in Europe as a stand-up comedian. In 2017, Brooks faced a major life decision. After nearly dying during a pro wrestling match in London, wrestling was no longer a career path.
I had to make up a decision. It's like work a normal office job or maybe live the dream that I always had to be a stand-up comedian. So I just decided to pursue it. I went to an open mic in Manchester in England, and from there it just evolved to becoming a full-time stand-up comedian.
All his life, Brooks dreamed of becoming a stand-up comedian, but stage fright always held him back.
I have to overcome my stage fright thanks to the pro wrestling ring. So basically I put tights on, put baby oil on, performed in front of strange people just to overcome the stage fright to finally become a stand-up comedian.
There's something else. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? He's like, you failed as a Jew.
To be honest, it's not really a challenge to perform in front of a sold-out crowd, because when there's more people, I actually have more energy. It's more of a challenge for me to perform in front of smaller audiences. That's when I really get tensed, and for some reason, every small glitch the crowd can notice. But when there's a sold-out crowd, I'm just like, I feel like I'm at home.
I raised a good Jewish boy, and you will never donate my organs. It's against our religious beliefs. I'm like, Mom, we're atheists. What religious beliefs are you talking about? She's like, you'll never do it. I was like, here I was just like pissed off, you know? I was completely pissed off, and I just told my mom, listen, Mom, you raised a good, honest Jewish boy, and that's why when you will die, I will sell your organs.
However, as an Israeli performing primarily in Europe, it comes with its fair share of challenges.
You don't know every aspect of their culture. I mean, I'm trying my best to learn about the cultures of Europe and to build jokes around that, obviously. But because obviously I was born and raised in Israel, my sense of humor is a little bit more, I'd say, Middle Eastern. But because my father is British, so I can get the British sense of humor. But the European, they have their own sense of humor, and you just need to learn about their culture, and then you can understand how to make them laugh.
The months of January and February 2020 were Brooks's best months, selling out shows throughout Central Europe, and then COVID-19.
COVID-19 hit me just like any other live entertainer. It's like January and February 2020 were amazing months for me. I was selling out shows in Europe. I was really looking forward for my tour. And the virus came, everything changed, and hopefully 2021 will be better than 2020 in that aspect. And let's just hope that I'll be back touring and becoming a successful comedian. That's it.
With speedy vaccination campaigns, brighter days are ahead. And Brooks looks forwards to when the world can laugh again.
Hopefully, the human race will be able to go back to where it was just in February 2020. That's what I'm hoping, and hopefully back on stages to perform live in front of sellout crowds in Europe.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
Thanks. Heat wave continuing tonight, but letting up a bit tomorrow. Warm lows this evening, remaining in the 60s and 70s or 20s in Celsius. Now moving on to tomorrow, Tuesday, highs in the 80s and 90s or 20s and 30s in Celsius. Stay cool and stay hydrated.
And of course, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. We see some shark diving off the coast. I wish. I guess if you can't leave Israel, you dive with the sharks. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.27 shekels to the American dollar and 2.61 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.